Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Clemens once again, and this is Vocab List 14, helping us to complete our vocab assignment, study for the vocab quiz. By the way, this vocab quiz is going to be in paragraph form, so make sure you actually listen. All right, so we're talking about the progressive era, and big thing you need to remember: reform, 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 reform. All right. Some general terms that are associated, obviously the first one is progressive era. Please reform, progressive, reform, progressive, reform. And they're trying to correct abuses in American society. So when you're talking about this, you might want to think about what some of the abuses maybe were. Like, for example, business practices like monopolies and trusts, or you might want to think about working conditions, being unsafe, long hours, low pay, child labor. You might want to think about, how the cities were with a lot of corruption and a lot of disease, and, the tenements not being safe or secure, things along those lines. And as we go, we're going to talk a bunch about who the progressive presidents were. We have Teddy Roosevelt, who's a Republican, Taft, who was also a Republican, and then Woodrow Wilson, who was a Democrat. And the time period, by the way, is right around 1900 to 1920. All right, muckrakers. Our muckrakers are the people who are pushing and digging and finding out what the bad things are that are going on, that then they talk, they kind of have their things going. Oh my God, I'm not talking in any kind of sensible way. They're exposing the bad things. And then the people get upset, and then the politicians, like Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, say, oh man, we should maybe do something about that. So these guys are trying to improve society, and we're going to talk about some of the specific ones in a second. And so I just like this: muckraking, the journalism that changed America. Just some general terms to kind of know, our starred terms for this list. Restrictive, that you're limiting something. So if we're going to restrict immigration, we're going to limit immigration. If we're going to restrict, I don't know, if we're going to restrict what kind of ingredients can go into certain products, we're limiting. We're saying what things can't go in there. And then assimilated, this is another sort of immigration kind of term. To assimilate, that you're conforming with other people. So you're adapting, you're adjusting. And so we talk a lot about how immigrants had to assimilate. All right, so here's some of our muckrakers. Our first guy is Jacob Riis, and yes, that's how you say it with the two I's, Jacob Riis. And he's the guy that is the photographer, and so he takes a lot of these pictures. And so I think we actually looked at this picture in class of these three little boys. And so he's looking at what life was like in the tenements, and showing these pictures to everybody. Upton Sinclair, he's the guy that writes The Jungle, that grosses us out and gets us the Meat Inspection Act, and talking about the meat packing industries and just how gross and just totally unregulated they were, and God only knew what you were eating. Lincoln Steffens, he's a guy that writes The Shame of the Cities, and he's talking about corruption in government, talking a lot about those big political bosses and how really democracy was not happening because things were so badly run. Margaret Sanger, she's not a muckraker per se, she's more a reformer, and so she was a big women's rights activist, particularly dealing with birth control. And I know that this is a controversial topic, but basically what she said is it's a woman's right to decide when if she's going to have children and how many children she's going to have. So she started a lobbying group that later on, after her death, became Planned Parenthood. And so yeah, and here she is, like, talking about it almost like, being a mom almost makes you be enslaved if you don't have the choice. Our next person is Ida Tarbell, and remember I said I kind of linked the tar with the oil, but she wrote The History of Standard Oil, and so she's definitely part of the thing leading into the Northern Securities versus the United States that we'll talk about later, the Supreme Court case that breaks up Standard Oil. So this is a great effort that she puts in. And so here's a cover of that book. And then Frank Norris, and he wrote The Octopus, and he was talking about the railroad in California. And remember, whenever we see the octopus, we're kind of like, the tentacles, going around and trying to control other things. All right, so some of the reforms that happened, we have initiative. And basically what this is where the voters get to decide what kind of law is going to be passed, where they basically petition the government and say, hey, you know what, we'd like to have something like this. So for example, the whole law that says you can't drive with cell phones, that started from a gentleman whose family, his wife and his children, died because somebody hit them because they were driving while talking on a cell phone, and he helped to get that law passed to prevent people from talking on their cell phone while they're driving. Referendum is when we get to actually vote on a law. So a really, there's so many examples. States that have had referendums on gay marriage. More recently, the big ones that you guys probably know about is like Colorado, talking about legalizing marijuana. So it's the people voting rather than their legislature voting. Recall is not something we have in New York, but it's a method used to get elected officials to leave office before their term is up. And it's not impeachment. It's not saying that they did something criminally wrong. It's basically saying, hey, we don't like you anymore. So there's a process to it. First, you vote to see whether you're going to recall them, and then you vote to see who will be the next elected official, particularly, we've heard a lot with governors. So a while back, when you guys were quite young, was the recall election that got Arnold Schwarzenegger elected governor of California. And this was just crazy. I mean, the people that were running, oh my God, you do not even want to know. I'm not even going to tell you who some of the crazies were that were running, but yeah, so that was a very high profile one. And then the more recent one just happened in Wisconsin, where they tried to recall their governor, and they could not do that. They could not pass that vote. So like I said, it's not that they did something illegal. It's that the people don't have confidence in them anymore. Direct primary is when members of a political party decide their candidate for public office. Previously, this was done in the state legislatures. So now the people are getting to decide. And so if you look, this is from back in 2008, and these are all the various Democratic candidates that were running for president. And so, so you would actually go and you're only voting for a Democrat in this. Now, different states have different rules. So like in New York, you have to, like a Republican couldn't vote in this particular primary. They could only vote in the Republican primary. Democrats can only vote in the Democratic primary. So if you're an independent in New York, you don't get to vote except for if there's an independent primary, which is not very common. Some states allow either party to go in and vote. So it depends on your state. And then the last one is environmental conservation, just trying to preserve nature for future generations. They're starting to realize that, natural resources won't be with us forever, and they want to protect them. And the big person we talk about with that is Teddy Roosevelt. Alrighty, folks, see you again for next time.